Hey everybody, so if I've timed this correctly, you are seeing this video after seeing my upload of my cover of The Model by Kraftwerk. And so I want to get into the ins and outs of that song and what I liked about it specifically in a moment, but I wanted to begin by saying this is the first of something new that I want to try. Obviously, uploading covers is a very, very popular thing right now, and I love doing covers where you can find something new in the sound. And certainly my interpretation of The Model was very different from the original. It's far from being just a note for note recreation of the song, although certainly all of the harmonic aspects of the song, all of the melody lines are there, all of the melody lines are there, all of the harmonic information is recreated, but it's all done in a very different way. And so I've wanted to do something like that, and I love that. I just love doing stuff like that. I've got a lot of other kind of genre-bending ideas coming down the pipe with this new project in the future, this project of putting out covers. But it gives me an opportunity to talk about a few things. One, people love hearing me talk about my favorite musical artists, so there you go, and especially the ones that have influenced me directly and everything. So it gives me a great opportunity to talk about that. Also, it gives me an opportunity to talk about production, which is not something I've gone into a lot. And a lot of people have asked me for insights into producing music and that sort of thing. And I've not talked about it as much for a couple of reasons. One, because if you are doing production, well, obviously the information that's involved in making a good mix and a good production, that is highly valued information, and learning it professionally can very quickly cost you many, many thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on how you study it and that sort of thing. And so while I certainly do not have the all-encompassing knowledge that the A-list producers have and that sort of thing, I do have enough knowledge that I can, use to my financial benefit with clients and that sort of thing, such that I'm not going to undercut, what I have by sharing everything. So if you're watching this series wanting to know a complete idea, getting a complete idea about how to produce music, you're not going to get it, but it will give you kind of some insight into it. The same way, I think that the music producer is kind of like the auteur director of the director auteur of the cinema world. I love directors like David Lynch. David Lynch and Takashi Miike, and so I always listen when I hear people say things like this movie reminds them of Terrence Malick, or it reminds them of Wes Anderson or something like that. The same is certainly very true of productions and of mixes. Like if you listen to a lot of different producers, you know what a Bob Rock production sounds like. You know what a Kevin Murphy production sounds like, and that sort of thing. And those are very, very different production sounds, very different sounds, and they're all valid. They're all great sounds, but there's a lot to it. There's a lot different. So there's that aspect of it. And then that said, the other reason I haven't talked about it as much is because unlike guitar, which I've been doing for over 25 years and doing professionally for about 20 years at this point, production is something that I've learned slowly as I've gone along because I didn't, when I went to Berkeley, I took, my major at Berkeley was what was known as the pro music major. And the thing is, the reason I picked that is because most of the other majors, they have, like, you could say within the 4 year curriculum of Berkeley, there's like almost a minimum, a sort of miniature undergrad, post-grad thing that happens where for the first half of your time there, you're basically getting the same education as everybody else, doing all your prerequisites, and then you declare your major, and now everything is completely focused on what your major is. And so what happens is, like, let's say you go into music education. Well, if you go into music education, you're going to be focusing a lot more on harmony and theory and that sort of thing, and a lot less on becoming a badass player. You know, you got the first four levels of your private instruction, the first four semesters, which the level 4 proficiency exam for guitar performance, private guitar instruction, is a fucking mother, man. I actually failed it the first time and had to do it again because I did YYZ as my proficiency piece, and I spent so much time on that I just botched everything else. And so anyway, so that was one thing. When I did pro music, I wanted to, you know, versus like if you become a performance major at Berkeley, then you're going to focus in on performing and leave the theory aspect of it behind. And while I wanted to be a badass guitarist, the thing is, being a performance major doesn't give you very much to fall back on or apply to your larger career, because outside of performing, because you don't need a degree to perform. All that matters is that you can do it. So while, you know, being able to say I went to Berkeley will automatically take me to the front of the line of any audition that I go out for, ultimately the quality of the playing is either there or it's not. So performance doesn't give you a lot to fall back on. So I went the pro music route, and music production is another major. I bring that up because Berkeley has some amazing music production facilities, and I worked with a lot of great music producer students while I was there and watched them and learned from them. I had them record my music for different things. I played on other people's projects for different things and that kind of thing. And so I had a great opportunity to observe so many people in the production department there, and got so much out of that. And then as I got out in the world and I started learning on my own, you know, how to handle a Pro Tools rig and everything on my own, and then also working with other producers and seeing, just following what they did, and having, you know, producers that were nice enough to just let me sit there and watch as they went through all the grunt work and everything, I learned a lot more about production. So I've always recorded covers. I've just never really put any of them out. I put one or two out here and there. I put out a cover of Icarus by Changes a few years ago that actually the guitarist from Changes commented and told me he really liked it, and I thought that was awesome. But I've never put out a lot of covers before. I have one of my projects, it's been dormant lately, but it's a jazz group, a jazz project called Other Strangers. And if you look that up on streaming services, there's covers of like songs by Leonard Cohen, Vince Guaraldi, you know, old jazz standard stuff Louis Armstrong did and that kind of thing, and some originals too. There's also a lounge jazz cover of About a Girl by Nirvana that I'm particularly proud of. Anyway, so that's bringing it around to that. But I've always done covers as a way to practice the studio, because that way I found if I go for it, you know, I'll have like, you know, I tend to do like an album every 2 years, it seems. And with Axis of Empires, I very deliberately do every 2 years. My mentor, Corey Lowry, told me that your project needs to put out an album every 2 years or it becomes a new band. And so Axis has always put out new material every 2 years. But anyway, so that kind of thing, I practice the studio so that way, otherwise I'll go through these periods where the only thing I'm using Pro Tools for is to record my ideas, you know, run off the different ideas I'm having. And then I come into the studio and I'm like, okay, what did I do with this thing 2 years ago? And that kind of thing. So you have to practice and keep your chops up that way. So that's a long introduction into talking about production. And every production is different. Like I said, every production is different. Every song is different. There's sonic continuity across albums. Like the Black Album has a very distinct sound to it. You know, just like Master of Puppets has a very distinct sound to it. That kind of thing. But ultimately, every production is different, and so I like accomplishing that goal, and I also like doing that thing, like I talked about, of hybridizing genres, because it puts me in a position where I have nothing to fall back on. I can't stop and say something like, you know, well, what is the kick drum supposed to sound like in a typical country song? Like if I'm covering Johnny Cash or something, what would Johnny Cash's drummer's bass drum sound like? It doesn't give me that opportunity. Instead, I have to think about what I'm trying to accomplish here. And so the song feels less like it feels less like a blueprint and more like a script, if that makes sense. And so that's really cool. Now, bringing all that around to talk about Kraftwerk and the models. So first, some historical context. I first heard Kraftwerk when I was living in Mississippi. You know, now Mississippi actually has some really beautiful and really incredible culture, but at the time, being a young teenager, who had just moved from the big city, I felt like I was completely cut off from reality down there, and it felt like the cultural knowledge that the average person had around me about what was going on in the popular culture was about like 4 or 5 years behind where it currently was, and then it was never what I was interested in, if that makes sense, or not totally what I was interested in. And so for me, my dad worked up in Memphis at the time, and he had a long commute every day, obviously, but he worked up in Memphis, and once in a while, you know, probably about once a month, we would spend our Saturday driving up to Memphis to go to all of the big bookstores. This was when Borders Books was still a thing. Go to the bookstores, go to the guitar stores. I would imagine it's still there. There was this great music store called Strings and Things. There's another one called Musitron, which is where I got my first guitar, and stuff like that, and all of that stuff, and do all of the big city dining and everything, and living, do all the big city living that we'd left behind when we moved out of the Atlanta area. And so on one of those excursions, I went to Borders, and that Borders was just I cannot begin to describe to you how important that Borders was to me. How important, you know, well, people can probably relate when we talk about how everyone of my age, around my age, remembers what it was like the smell of a Blockbuster. If you walked into Blockbuster Video, it had that smell. The last Blockbuster Video, and the only Blockbuster Video that still exists, actually, it exists mainly as a nostalgia trip for people who want to visit, but they sell candles that have the Blockbuster Video smell. You know, it's like that thing. Okay, walking into that Borders, the smell of the coffee, the way the smell of the coffee interacted with the smell of fresh ink it's just one of the most important smells. And sadly, Borders is gone. And Borders is gone, and the smell of that combination of that particular coffee with fresh book ink is lost forever. There are so many books. Like if I turned around, I wonder if I could put my hand on one that I know I got there. But I'm not seeing one immediately. I'm sure there are some here I'm sure I'll find one the nanosecond I turn this video off. But, you know, just that book, that's where I got my first copy of the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis and that kind of thing. That was where, you know, I went to this kiosk and heard Megadeth's Cryptic Writing album for the first time. So many of just these crucial experiences. And I remember thinking, like, looking forward to the day when I would be a fully grown adult with my trench coat and briefcase, and I could come here entirely on my own as an adult and get like the full experience of this place. That kind of thing. It's just this magical, utterly magical place that the sensory input just put me in another reality. And I really felt like walking through books and CDs and everything in that place, like I really was just walking through different realities, like in the movie Paprika or something like that. And so this was a crucial place for me. And one day I came upon one of these music kiosks. Now, again, you have to remember, it was not, if you grew up in my generation, my generation was really the last generation to have a concept of scarcity when it came to music. Nowadays, everybody born after my generation more or less has grown up with music being completely and all music being, or the majority of music being completely and instantly available wherever they go. And so it was an interesting experience because I would go into, I had to buy stacks and stacks of guitar magazines to educate myself about the history of music and about the history of rock and roll, and read and research. There was no Wikipedia. The internet was in its infancy. And so one day I go in there, and in Barnes and Noble, the albums would be grouped off into four units at a time per listening kiosk. And so at this one listening kiosk, put on the headphones, and the four albums that were lined up were the first Enigma album, which is a great album, but I can't think of the title of it because of the four albums, the only one I didn't ultimately buy. But then the Ultravox, The Collection, which is it's a greatest hits album, but it's one of my favorite albums of all time. It's the best works of Ultravox, or all the singles by Ultravox. And that was there. Ultravox, The Collection was there. Depeche Mode, People Are People, which is also a greatest hits album, but it was my introduction to Depeche Mode. And then Kraftwerk's album, Computer World, was there. The Kraftwerk album, Computer World, was the first one I listened to. And world, I keep swallowing that word, Computer World. My dad was a programmer, so I grew up around programmers and technical people. And this was back in the glory days, the early glory days, the 80s and early 90s of technology, when it was just booming, booming, booming. We're finding all this stuff. Before we were bitter and cynical about the internet and technology and all of that like we are now. It was just endlessly hopeful. It felt like we were having one space shuttle launch after another. I'd open up Electronic Entertainment Monthly, and I'm subscribed to that magazine before it was PC Gamer, so I'm really showing my age. But Electronic Entertainment Monthly, I would open that that magazine up and learn about these new technical innovations, and it was so exciting and just so much cool stuff happening. And anyway, so Computer World, that really spoke to me, and that name really spoke to me. And the music was so cool because it was unlike anything I had heard. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. I was, like I said, very much a product of the computer programmer culture, and I thought that, like, these early tech demos and things like, the Mind's Eye stuff and that sort of thing, the kind of computer graphics that were used for the Lawnmower Man and stuff like that. And I say that because a lot of the graphics from the Lawnmower Man were from Mind's Eye and vice versa. And so, things like that. And the second Mind's Eye is especially good because Jan Hammer has an amazing soundtrack for that. But anyway, all of these, tech demos and, graphics demos and everything, I just thought all of that was the coolest stuff ever. And so I thought it was so cool that this is the music that's the soundtrack to that. And it even said in the little card that explained, the little recommendation card that explained what Kraftwerk was, it said that their music is, to this day, continues to be popular as background music for computer product demonstrations and all of this stuff. And you have to remember, like I said, I thought every tech demo I saw was another window into the Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov future that awaited all of us. So I put that on. And again, if you've never heard Computer World, go listen to Computer World. If you've already heard Computer World, go listen to Computer World again after you listen to the new Axis of Empires album, Heretics and Orthodoxy. I learned how to do these sharp pivots like that into advertising from Brett Cooper. I love how she handles that. But anyway, so the thing is, though, Computer World is amazing because it really captured the feeling of being in the world of computers, this other thing. And it's like, again, computers were not ubiquitous like they are now. Most houses did not yet have a personal computer, and most of the time, if they did, it was something that only dad used and the kids played Nintendo, that kind of thing. And so it was just so amazing because you listen to the first track on Computer World and you feel like you're flying through this. We don't say this anymore. We used to call the internet cyberspace, which is such an evocative name. We don't come up with evocative names for things like that anymore. Now we get something cool and we call it Chat GPT. It's God. If we discovered menstruation now, we would call it bleed L413 or something. I don't know. But anyway, it's like we don't come up with beautiful articulate names for things like that anymore. So cyberspace, and you feel like, you would feel like you were flying through cyberspace, through this strange, beautiful world inside the computer, something from Tron or something like that. Listening to Computer World by Kraftwerk, this is what you feel. And so it's like, and they sound like computers. It doesn't sound like something that was generated by people. It sounds like a sentient computers got together. And it's so funny because like one of the songs on Computer World is called Pocket Calculator. And one of the Kraftwerk is 4 keyboardists, and they do vocal stuff too, but it's just 4 keyboardists. And so one of them, they have guys that sing more than others, but one of them on the song Pocket Calculator, which actually they have a little musical instrument that they made that's a calculator-looking device, but it's actually a musical instrument that they made to play the melody on Pocket Calculator. And it plays the melody in Pocket Calculator, and then there's a line where it says, "I'm the operator with my pocket calculator." And so I was reading on Facebook recently how this one guy said he saw Kraftwerk playing with like 22,000 people in an arena or something like that, and the calculator instrument was not functioning. And so the guy who was in charge of the calculator just said, "I'm the operator with my broken calculator." And it's so surreal because it's a human thing. Humans compensate for errors, make little jokes like that to compensate for errors. And it's so weird because the guys in Kraftwerk, they don't seem like people, they seem like robots. And that's especially ironic because they actually have robot versions of themselves that will come out at one point during the show and take over playing the instruments for a little bit. And they've even, as like a spectacle thing, but they've even joked that eventually they're going to get so old they just have to send the robots out on tour and that's it. But I was just completely fixated on it was this narrow-ish window in my life where I really got enamored with electronic music that way, and I very quickly, this was right at in fact, if I recall correctly, because I asked for Ultravox the Collection and Kraftwerk Computer World I asked for all 4 of those CDs actually, and those were the 2 that I got. But which, if I'd gotten the Depeche Mode, I probably would have gone even more goth than I did in school. But anyway, but I got those 2 albums. I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, I got those 2 albums when I was 12, which was a year before I got my first guitar. So it was this very narrow thing where what motivated me to get the guitar was listening to heavy music and Nirvana and Metallica and Van Halen and all of these different heavy bands. If I had not gone that route, it's very likely I would have gotten a piano and started taking piano lessons to go down that road, because I was just fascinated by this beautiful science fiction music. And so that's what I loved about Kraftwerk. And so the album, Computer World, was one that I kept with me and listened to for a long time. But again, you have to remember, this was not a time when all of the albums of an artist were instantly available to you. So it was actually a long time before I got into more of their music. And The Model is not on, the song The Model is not on Computer World. It's on Man Machine, and or Machine Man, I forget how it translates directly, but but anyway, it's on that album, and I did not hear that version of it originally. The first interpretation, or the first time I heard The Model, was it was an interpretation by another guitarist. I heard Snakefinger's version of it on his album. It's either on Greener Postures or Chewing Hides the Sound. I can't remember which one specifically right now. But it's the one where he's doing this and his finger becomes a snake. But anyway, but I heard Snakefinger's version of it because I was becoming, this was later on in my teenage years, and I was becoming absolutely obsessed with The Residents. And I actually have some ideas for some Residents covers for this series that could be really fun. But anyway, I heard Snakefinger's version on that solo album. Snakefinger was the longtime guitar collaborator for The Residents. I say guitar collaborator because he was never officially in the band. The actual members are anonymous. But anyway, so he was their longtime collaborator, and I heard his version of it, and I really loved it. And his has this kind of like weird, like it has like almost a Brian Eno feel to it. That album sounds a lot like and a lot of Snakefinger stuff sounds like the Brian Eno, Robert Fripp collaborations, like that kind of thing. And so I really enjoyed his version, heard Kraftwerk's version much later, and it's so odd because it's that thing of like a lot of early iterations of genres are like this, where it's kind of like if you go back and really listen to the guitar tones on the early Led Zeppelin albums, there's actually not a lot there. Like a lot of what you thought was a huge guitar tone was your mind filling in the gaps because, with your perception of it, but the actual guitar tone, there's not very much there. And so with a lot of early electronic music like that, somebody told me not to, slap the table too hard because it really comes through. But a lot of electronic music now, you hear the bass drum and it's really punching and, hitting you in the chest, that kind of thing. And early electronic music, Kraftwerk was the original, basically, for the most part. I mean, Kraftwerk came along about the same time as like Tangerine Dream and some of the other electronic experimenters. Klaus Schulze, who started out as a member of Tangerine Dream and all of that. And so they didn't really have a concept of how to produce electronic music yet. And so consequently, the sound of Kraftwerk's original version of The Model is very, very thin. Like, even in remastered versions of that original version, you don't get a lot of bass. You don't get a lot of you don't get a lot of the bass drum, and you don't get a lot of the bass register part. It's not an actual bass, but the bass line. You don't get a lot of that. The high-end synths are actually fairly thin. There's not a lot of rapidly oscillating frequencies in the synthesizers because they really couldn't do that yet. It would be, probably another decade and a half before like Nine Inch Nails came along and took it from where you have like a synthesized tone, like a sine wave tone or a sawtooth tone that's just like that, just unbroken tone, before you could get it to do that, before that, and where you could get it to do like a, that kind of thing. Like you could kind of do that with the early Moog synths, but there was a lot of development that had to happen before you could just have a keyboard with all of that in it, and not the big bank of knobs and knobs and plugs and buttons. And the early synthesizers, if you haven't seen them, look like a 1940s phone operator's punch board and everything. Uh, and so it was a long time before Nine Inch Nails came along and industrial music and all of that stuff. You're seeing early concepts of industrial music, like Boyd Rice was doing the stuff of like cooking vinyl records in the stove and playing them on top of each other to create soundscapes and things like that. But you didn't have industrial music as it now exists, and so I wanted to do, bringing it now at 30 minutes, bringing it around to my version of the model. Usually, when I have an idea for a cover where I really change it up a lot, there will be something that I hear in the song that I feel like I could bring out, or that could give like a different example or a different perspective on the song. And with the model, this is where all of the discussion of that thinness in the production becomes relevant, because in the model we hear this thump. You don't hear a lot of the bass, you don't hear a lot of the great low end and that kind of thing, where you're not hearing that. Instead, I wanted to bring that out, and I wanted to kind of take this early electronic dance hit and re-envision it through, all the way through to what's available in the modern age. And on top of that, obviously, I do a lot of heavy metal, hard rock, guitar type stuff, and I love big, crunchy guitar distortion and all that. So to me, there's something really magical that happens when heavy metal and hard rock artists remake electronic synth pop songs. Just something so magical. There's probably the most profound example was when Marilyn Manson redid "Sweet Dreams" by Eurythmics. Had a similar hit, although not as impactful, later when they did a reimagining of Soft Cell's "Tainted Love" for a movie soundtrack. But "Sweet Dreams" is an excellent example, and that "Sweet Dreams," I mean, Nine Inch Nails was already going full force, but "Sweet Dreams" made Marilyn Manson a mainstream artist, and then Antichrist Superstar came out and all of that, and really ushered in the industrial metal era. But there's just something cool. Other examples, like when Dope covered "You Spin Me Round" by Dead or Alive. It's a crossover example, but another example would be when Disturbed covered "Land of Confusion" by Genesis. These synth pop type oriented songs just always sound so cool. Again, when Marilyn Manson covered "Personal Jesus," it was another great one, Depeche Mode. When heavy artists cover these synth pop songs, a really great obscure one that I just remembered, not obscure, but less talked about one, is when Cradle of Filth covered "Temptation." Another great one. Like, something so cool always comes out of doing it this way. One of the things I want to do for this project eventually is cover an Ultravox song, provided I can do it justice, and also because I'm quite frankly terrified of trying to sing anything like Midge Ure, who is an amazing vocalist. But anyway, so this thing came about, and I wanted to do something with it like that. Snakefinger had kind of given me the seed of the idea to do a guitar-oriented version, but his version really doesn't derivate very much. He just replaces the guitar, the keyboards with guitar in a couple of parts, and sings and does basically the same song. So I wanted to do something different, and I was thinking about one of the most important things. Now, as you're hearing this version of it, understand you may not even, I'm doing this commentary as I'm sitting down to upload my video version of the song itself, or a video of my version of the song itself, now that it has been released on streaming and all of the distribution rights issues have cleared and all of that, and it's have been cleared, and it's streaming on all the services and everything like that. Now I'm putting up my version. So the version you may hear here on YouTube or on streaming services and all of that may still not be the actual the best quality version of it, just because it seems like with streaming services, what always happens pardon me, even if I'm ultimately satisfied with the mix, there's always a different types of like, different streaming services will have like, it sounds like their own compression or their own compression or their own leveling and things like that, their own gating and stuff like that, that kind of makes everything function at the same level no matter what artist you're listening to. So it's not like you jump from one to the other and it blasts you and that kind of thing. And those things like lose a lot of what I'm talking about in quality. So if I'm talking about something and you're not hearing it, maybe try listening to it on a different format. I don't want to just start sending out the original file, because obviously getting the ball rolling with having people stream these covers and everything is important to what I'm trying to do with this. So anyway, so talking about the actual mixing of the song, the first and foremost, a great dance track has to have a great bass line. And obviously, the model has a good bass line. What's funny, though, is that it's to get that great bass line, I had to basically take one of the treble register parts and use it as the bass line. And so that it has to start with that very, very ballsy, very punchy bass sound. And so doing that, I mean, my best, one of my new best friends in the studio for mixing, getting great bass sounds is Bomb Factory. It's a preset or a patch board called Bomb Factory. It has is great for bringing out that low end. Now, it will not add a low end that is not there, but it, but in terms of creating the compression space to, or making use of the compression space rather, to emphasize a great low end. It's wonderful for that. So I love, like, again, I have the original file of the model, and I love putting that on in my car and just feeling it move my car the way, the way the guys that play their rap music too loud and everything make the bass sound in there, like it just vibrates my whole car without distorting the overall track, which is great. And that is just it. I was really pleased with the bass because it really hit the sweet spot. I did the drums a little differently. Rather than doing the drums as like, now those are samples. They're not, the overall drum part is not sampled. I had to program it, but they are the individual sounds you hear, the snare hit and the kick drum and all that. Those are obviously sampled. The kick drum is a combination of an electronic drum kick and a bass drum kick, a brighter bass drum kick that's supposed to be for recording death metal, but I like it to use it as like a color tone on top of the lower kick from the electronic sound. I did that, but it still sounds very organic and very natural. It really does sound like a natural acoustic drum kit. And interestingly enough, I thought about going the full-on 9 Inch Nails route with the drum sound, but instead I decided to make it sound a lot more natural, like something you'd hear in like the dance, the acoustic dance music department of like funk music and swing and that sort of thing. Because one, it just felt a little bit more, I wanted a more human vibe to it. And two, just because that acoustic tonality created a lot more space in the mix for the bass to occupy. And the idea when we talk about, people will say, if they tell you to make their instrument louder, every producer will tell you there's nothing worse than an artist that's just constantly demanding their sound, their instrument be moved up louder and louder and louder, because obviously I know it's your instrument. You want to sound as awesome and present as you can, but you play a specific role within the overall sound, and we can't compromise that for the sake of your ego. But if you think about it, the way the comparison I like to make is, it's not, people think, oh, all you need to do is push that slider up louder and I'll be louder in the mix. No, you can't make one thing. The volume, slider, calling it a volume slider is a little bit of a misnomer. Yes, it makes you louder and softer, but really what it does is control how present you are in the mix, how dominating your sound is in the mix. Think about it this way, like the metaphor I like to use is, there used to be, back in the days of phone booths with doors on them, there used to be a thing that college kids would do where they would try to see how many guys they could, how many guys can we pack into one How many guys can we pack into one phone booth? You know, can we get 10 guys in there? Can we get 15? Can we get 20? You know, they compact themselves in there, and that, you know, people have been doing different versions of Tide Pod challenges and that kind of thing since time immemorial. But anyway, this was the thing for a while. How many guys, how many football players or something can we pack into a phone booth? And someone probably has the Guinness record for how many guys have been packed into one phone booth and stuff like that. But anyway, so this was a thing. This was a popular practice for a while. And think about music, mixing a band, mixing a sound mixing and mastering a sound. Think about it, a song. Think about it as being like that. If you want, you only have this limited amount of space, and we're trying to get as many guys into that phone booth as possible. And let's say we want to get a really, really big guy in there because he's like Mr. Cool and he's the coolest thing ever. And for the photo we're going to take, we want to make sure he's in there doing his goofy face or whatever. But he's too big, and that means, this little guy a couple of these little guys are going to have to come out. That kind of thing. That's the way to think of a mix and to think of what's happening in the mix. Because we don't have, if we bring this up, everything else has to take a step back. Everything else has to accommodate it. This is one of the reasons side chaining is so popular. That's another concept. This is one of the reasons side chaining is so popular. Anyway, everything else has to kind of take a step back for something new and big to come in. So with mixes, you really have to decide what is featured and what is taking a step back. And, it's even true in bands. Like if you go listen to a band like Dream Theater, John Petrucci and, thank God, Mike Portnoy, once again, are, as much as I love Mike Mangini, and I knew him when I was at Berkeley, but I want Portnoy back in that band. Anyway, drums and guitar are going to be the main thing, the first and foremost things you hear in a Dream Theater mix. You very seldom ever will hear John Petrucci on guitar and Jordan Rudess on keyboards playing at exactly the same volume or with that exactly the same presence. One is usually in front of the other and vice versa. And it's the same kind of thing. So with a mix like this, you have to decide what's up front and what's in the background. The bass has to be up front, and I wanted an overwhelming bass sound. I wanted this bass sound to just be a big, 15-inch dick that's smacking you in the face, man. Just every time you heard this, I wanted you to get whacked, feel like you're just getting smacked in the face with it. And so that was important. I sat down to do this and don't have my bass. There it is. So the bass I use, this is my main studio bass. I don't do a lot of bass live unless I'm subbing or something. I'm primarily a guitarist. But this is my main studio bass. It's a 5-string Ibanez piezo bass, and I'm not going to lie, I got it right after college, and my main criteria was that it looked like something Prince would use. And it's Ibanez Ergodyne, that's how you say it. So anyway, but I thought it looked like something Prince would play is the main reason I got it. But this is such a cool bass. Now, it creates some problems because this is a piezo bass and it has active pickups. It has one pickup. And so it can be a little bit of a problem when I have to do somebody else's bass because other people's basses have different, very different sounds, and it can be a bit of a challenge when you're really only used to dealing with one bass. So much so that for more amiable bass players, I'll ask them to just use this for the session. But again, I understand if you've got Binky, I'm not going to take Binky away from you because, you want to record with Binky, that's fine. But anyway, so it's a 5-string bass, and so I just did, without all the buzz because I'm hitting harder so you can hear it, but that kind of thing, and get that really great riff in there, that really hypnotic, repetitive bass line that keeps showing up. Throw that in there and really get people vibing to it with by having it be a bass line instead of a larger, an upper register synthesizer part. So I got that. Then when it came to, in an interest of making this as different as possible, bringing the guitar in and getting that guitar tone is very important. And I have a couple of different patch boards that I use for guitar tone. One of them is the standard onboard SansAmp emulator that comes with Pro Tools, and I've used that a lot, and it's great for getting onboard effects. And then our onboard guitar tones. But usually with guitar, I have to layer something else with it, because what I'll do is I'll record the part, and I have like just a basic distortion that I use to record the part. Then when I've got 2 tracks of the same thing, I dump it down to a single file so I can do left and right. I'm already telling you people way too much about how this works. But anyway, so I've got left and right. And then what I'll do is I'll use one of them to get like that lower crunchy kind of AC/DC aspect of the distortion, if that makes sense. The that sort of thing. And then I'll use another one to get like a brighter high-end sound from the distortion. The kind of bright high end that we associate with Iron Maiden and early Judas Priest and that sort of thing. And I'll put those together to create a larger sound, and then that I will double up that sound, play those tracks together, and reamp them through my live amp, which is a custom with a K head through a crate cabinet. I'll re-amplify that. Someone was asking me, by the way, if I actually delivered that letter I wrote to my downstairs neighbor that has hilariously loud sex. No, I did not, because I feel like as long as I put up with her doing that, she can put up with me reamping guitars in the middle of the afternoon and that sort of thing. But that's how all of that works. And reamping, by the way, is just when you take a guitar track that's already been recorded and you cable it out to, you run a guitar cable from the output of your board over to the speaker head or the cabinet head, and then mic up the cabinet head and run that mic line back into your console, your recording console, and from that, and then just create a kind of a loop right there. And from there, you record that live guitar tone coming back in, so you get the effect of live guitar, not just onboard guitar distortion. And so that, and that was, as I'm citing producers I worked with, that was Matt Washburn at Lead Belly Sound was the one where I really picked up on that idea. I'd heard of it, but I'd never seen it done before then. And so that's a little bit into how I get my guitar tone. Obviously, there's more to it than that, and there's a lot of knowledge about where all those dials go and everything that I'm not going to share, because those are the tricks of the trade. But getting that tone, what I was looking for in the tone was something that could sit right on top of, like in terms of frequency, emphasized frequency, the bass was going to get a brighter but still heavier tone, and I needed guitar to sit right on top of that, to just sit right there on top of it. And because the bass is driving this, the guitar, it's not like a Black Sabbath song where the guitar is driving it and the bass is along for the ride. This is, the bass is driving it, and to make it work as a heavy reinterpretation of a synth pop song, the guitar has to just sit right on top of the bass. So I spent a lot of time on that guitar, not as much time as I usually spend, probably because I'm coming right off of the Axis of Empires album, so I was just ready to produce again and ready to get going and ready to apply the lessons. I'm always learning in this process, and ready to apply the lessons I learned from that onto this project. And so I really worked carefully, and I had the revelation, well, okay, fine, I'll tell you, most of you won't apply it anyway. I applied Bomb Factory to the guitar tone, which is not something I usually do. And so I applied Bomb Factory to the guitar tone, and that was what gave me the compression space I needed to just make that tone, the guitar tone, sit right on top of the bass tone like that, where they sound like, it sounds more like the guitar tone is completing the bass tone rather than coexisting with it, if that makes sense. And so it's almost kind of like what they do with Tool and stuff like that. So that was a huge emphasis for me. And so I did that. And then I wanted to make all of the keyboard patterns, all the keyboards that I used here sound aggressive, aggressive like what you hear on a KMFDM album and that sort of thing. And and so I wanted to hear it in something like that, and really focused on rapidly oscillating synthesizer sounds, synth patches that go back, and if you, I'm generalizing here, but go back and forth like that, really bounce back, and the tone really bounces back and forth on itself, so you get this really screeching, intense sound. And that's why when you hear, in the original song, that little melody that comes in, ba-dum, ba-da-da-dun, da-dun, it's very mellow, it's very light. I wanted that to really scream at you. And I wanted, when this is a song where the hook is not done by the vocals, the hook is done, the verses are done vocally, and then the chorus is instrumental. And I wanted that instrumental chorus line to have like that kind of, it was a very specific sort of high pass, is sort of filtered, high pass filtered tone, synth tone that you heard a lot in a lot of 90s electronic music. You'd hear it in like Crystal Method and Chemical Brothers and God Lives Underwater and stuff like that. And I wanted to use that and make it sound all the more trippy. I didn't want it to sound like this kind of laid-back surrealist lounge music that Kraftwerk was making. Not that that's bad. I didn't want it to sound like that. I wanted it to sound heavy, and I wanted it to sound like Rammstein and what they call, I can't say the German for it, but the term is the new German hardness is what Rammstein's genre officially is. I wanted that. I wanted Rammstein, I wanted KMFDM, and all that stuff. I don't even it's funny, Nine Inch Nails is pretty much the most famous industrial artist in the world, but they're not what I think of when I think of industrial, because they're very much their own thing. It's kind of like, it's more appropriate if you're saying what is rock and roll, it's more appropriate to give an example of like Chuck Berry or Little Richard than it is Steely Dan, even though it is rock music, if that makes sense. Like, it's very much its own thing. But anyway, so I was listening to like mainstream industrial stuff, Rammstein, KMFDM, Frontline Assembly, all of that stuff, Lords of Acid, stuff like that. That was the vibe I wanted from it. And so I got that with the high, the fast oscillating synthesizers and stuff like that. And there's not really a guitar solo to speak of, so I kind of did, there's that interlude where it does that arpeggio, that part. I did that on guitar and ran it through a chorus and flange and everything, so it sounds just a little bit weird. With chorus and flange, like with reverb, a little goes a very long way, so I didn't want to like get into that too much. Anyway, so then vocally, obviously y'all were probably not expecting me to come on with big German sounding voice, yeah. But as I listened to it, I originally, I have my guitar with me, maybe or ready on hand, maybe I can just do this one, but she's going, my voice is shot, so I really can't sing right now, but my natural pitch is going to be more like she's going out to, she's going out to nightclubs drinking. Going out to nightclubs drinking just champagne. I can't sing right now, but anyway, that's basically where my regular singing voice would be. And so I sang it and I was listening to it and my voice just wasn't fitting with what it was supposed to sound like. And so I thought, I'm going to have to like push myself down into a Peter Steele type range or something. And so the thing is, it's really impossible to get down to that point and not just sing it with the full-on Till Lindemann German accent and everything. So I did, she's going out to nightclubs drinking just, that kind of thing. You just kind of get down there and start doing it. So it felt appropriate for that. Last but not least, one of the things that makes me want to do this more is being able to come up with little visuals for the project using Midjourney. And it was so much fun. It's so much fun creating these images, and you're going to be able to tell I like, nobody was able to guess what this was when I put the image up. When you see the ones I have coming up, I've got a couple more that hopefully might be a little more obvious. But anyway, the so the whole doing that whole image was just a lot of fun. It's really cool to mess around with Midjourney because I had to do like woman, you know, at first I tried doing like cyborg android woman at, you shouldn't say android woman, an android woman is a gynoid, but anyway, but you know, female cyborg walking fashion runway and everything. And that really wasn't getting me what I wanted, so I got it to generate like a regular, or an image of a regular woman walking a fashion runway, and then like a separate image of like a you know, endoskeleton Terminator type, you know, skeleton thing, and combine the two, blending. It lets you blend images together, and that gave it the understanding I needed to get the image I wanted. And so got a lot of different cool images like that of these like women, these things that look half woman, half Terminator, walking, you know, a tight, or walking a catwalk at a fashion show and everything. And so that was really cool, and actually got what I wanted. And I think it really adds to the surrealness of it. So, you know, recording covers is so, you know, you think about how many artists became huge primarily off of covers, like Johnny Cash. Most of Johnny Cash's stuff is covers, his big hits are covers, you know, that kind of thing. But it inevitably has the personality of Johnny Cash in it. And that's what I'd like to do with these covers. You know, Meatloaf's songs were technically all covers because Jim Steinman, you know, wrote, you know, all the classics, wrote all the classics and everything. But they're still have the Meatloaf punch to them, the feel. That's what I want to do with these covers, like find my personality in other people's songs. So anyway, everyone wants to talk about production. There you go. It's a fun topic to talk about, and I really enjoy getting into the ins and outs of it. Take care.